Hi, I'm Karin Wilkins. I'm a professor of media studies at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm also director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and editor of Communication Theory. I am particularly grateful to the Center for Women's and Gender Studies here at the University of Texas at Austin for a core faculty grant to enable me to complete this research on my book, Communicating Gender and Advocating Accountability in Global Development. This research pulls together years of work that I've done trying to understand why so much money is spent on women and gender issues in global development work, yet women's conditions haven't improved, and seriously haven't improved enough. In some situations, women's conditions are slightly better, but in many cases they're not. So I wanted to look at a variety of kinds of programs and evaluate the limitations of these gender programs. So there are a couple of key points. When I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about not just women's conditions, but women's conditions in relation to men. And what's particularly important in development work is trying to understand our identities, not just in terms of gender, but in terms of class, race, ethnicity, all of these different kinds of experiences that situate us in terms of power and oppression and what we can get done in our lives. Development is another key component of this research, and development can be seen as a strategic intervention designed for public benefit. Development can be something that culminates from a political protest. It can also be something that comes from United Nations organizations. The idea is that groups collectively come together and intentionally try to improve something on behalf of society. Now I also look at communication in a variety of different ways. Big in my field is something known as communication for development, trying to understand how we can use television or film or some sort of strategic communication to improve society. But we also have to understand the rhetoric, the discourse of how we're discussing social problems, because that constrains the possible solutions that we have. For example, if we understand problems as women's problems and not within the context of gender, and they fail, it's because we really haven't understood the context in which people work. So communication is part of that. I also look at communication as part of a global political economic industry, and that matters particularly when I talk about celebrities, particularly celebrity women who get involved in girls' education. So in the book, I look at three different kinds of development programs. One is population maternal health, the other is girls' education, and then the third is women's microenterprise. What I'm looking at is how women become talked about in the context of gender, whether women are seen as passive targets of intervention or are participating and having some sort of agency. The interesting thing here is that if you look at particularly programs from the United States or Europe, the northern, western formal development agencies, there's often a sense of heroism in terms of who gets to be the hero to solve really devastating global problems. And there's a gendered sense of heroism. For men to become heroes in development, they become heroes because of their business savvy or something about their individual achievement, whereas women often are relegated to roles as mothers. The female heroism is through glamour or compassion. And this becomes particularly seen in celebrities and how celebrities get involved in global development. If you look at celebrity and wealth globally, and clearly this is male-dominated. Only 11 of the 100 wealthiest people in the world are women, and most of these are wealthy through inheritance or through marriage. The few women who are wealthy in the world are through media commodification. I looked at microenterprise also in South Asia, and this is something through which women can also potentially have agency through running small businesses. Now what happens with women who are celebrities, and three of the people I've talked about in this book are Oprah, Madonna, and Angelina Jolie. They have each started girls' schools with varying success. But when we hear about what they've done, it often becomes lost in a sense of whether or not they were seen as good mothers or compassionate or somehow magical. They're not seen in the same way that Bono and others are seen for just having that business savvy kind of approach. What that means is that these women who have money, are incredibly wealthy and unusual, they have the potential to have agency in the process of development. But even then, it becomes very limited in terms of the way they're seen and what they can achieve. With microenterprise, we see something similar in that the projects themselves are talking about how much women can do with these small businesses. But the way the microenterprise model works is that banks are giving loans to collectives of women to do certain kinds of projects. We're not seeing women in the banks. We're not seeing the women running things. We're not seeing the potential for women to run large-scale businesses. So we're not seeing women's role either as citizens in their communities, as leaders, whether it's leaders in businesses, leaders in communities, leaders in nations. A lot of the microenterprise literature talks about the strength of one particular entrepreneur, Muhammad Yunus, and he's the one who won the Nobel Prize. And he is talked about as a savior, as a pioneer, whereas the women in these stories, in these narratives, they're shown as being grateful, that they were impoverished and that they were saved in a sense by the man. A lot of these stories tell this in the same way over and over again, that there's somehow men who are necessary to save women. And it becomes important when we hear about empowerment. A lot of the global development projects talk about women's empowerment. But I question, what does that empowerment mean? Often by empowerment, they're talking about self-esteem and confidence. And that may be important in some social situations, but what I think matters even more is empowerment to be mobile in public spaces, empowerment to make money, empowerment to keep the money one earns, empowerment to have the right to marry, divorce, have health care, basic health care. These are the kinds of power, particularly social and political power, that I think really matter. I also look at population programs in Egypt, and one of the reasons why I chose that as a site is that Egypt was the site of a very important global conference on population issues. And here was the potential for female political leaders from around the world to be recognized for how much work they have been doing in global development. Hillary Clinton was there, many high-level women were there. But instead of focusing on the achievements of actual female leaders in these conferences, what they kept focusing on instead was the problems that women face and framing them more as victims rather than as people who have some ability to navigate, or the problems that structures create for women in trying to find access to health care and services. So one of the key pieces of this book is the need to zoom out and not focus on just women and small-scale issues, but to zoom out from attention from just women to gender, to zoom out from the idea that empowerment is just individual self-esteem, but empowerment has to do with your capacity to achieve things as a group in society. And development isn't just one small-scale program, but development has to be seen as a broader set of strategies designed to improve the conditions for many people. The other thing I want to zoom out on is communication. Communication is not just one particular medium, but communication is a set of processes that bring in a variety of ways that we talk and share information, and that is all very much part of a political economy of information. So how do women become visible, often in problematic ways through commodification? How do women come to have voice, also in ways that can be problematic? The voice, the vision is very limited by these larger structures that are trying to sell something, that are trying to, in a way, perpetuating the existing power structures in the first place. The book includes the idea of accountability, and I want to conclude here with the idea that by accountability, I'm not talking about a very narrow sense of each project must be sure that each dollar is spent appropriately. That does matter. The ethics of programs, these matter a great deal. But I'm thinking about accountability as social accountability, accountability to solving the problem, not just the narrow project. And I merge this idea with advocacy because it's the advocacy piece that is inspiring. It's not management merely of certain kinds of health services or educational programs, but it's seeing the real significance of girls' education as well as boys' education, the significance of population services for women and men, for girls and boys, seeing the significance of programs that enable people to earn a living in their communities. These things matter in terms of solving social problems, not just the particular project. So it's an accountability that also is about unintended consequences. You may have a development program that has a very clearly defined mission and goal, but this kind of accountability means understanding all of the things that may have happened that are related to the program that are not intended. So you may have women making money but having no ability to deal with labor rights and safety conditions. You may have women with access to healthcare services, but the contraceptions that they're able to acquire aren't necessarily safe. There are a lot of potential unintended consequences that really do matter here. And so that's part of what we're talking about with the accountability. In concluding this, what I'm saying is that it's power that matters, and power helps us to understand how gender is produced and circulated, and how power becomes reinforced and contested, that this is a dynamic set of circumstances, and that there is the potential to try to do a much better job in making better programs that understand the context of gender and improving situations for people.